this was the first episode where there wasn't a duel.
There was a duel.
Was there?
Yes, there was. The Shadow Girls came out. They told you what was going to happen. Utena, went whoosh, and she was wearing the dueling...
Complete with the little things on her shoulders.
Exactly. You gotta look close. I mean, some people don't even realize till you point it out to them, right? Utena has her normal uniform, but then it magically turns into the dueling uniform. It adds shoulder things and fluffy things at the bottom, and it's slightly modified.
So her and Anthe both change uniforms when dueling time happens. No one else does.
Right, and Utena did this even though she was not in the secret forest. As far as we can tell.
Yeah, well, she did it to save Anthe, and we can talk a little bit about that.
Which is also what she's doing in the duels, usually.
So, the Shadow Girls will come every episode, but a duel in the, someone gets fucked up sense will not happen every episode. In fact, for the rest of Season 1, it's going to happen about every other episode.
Well, I mean, instead of, staircase stock footage, they use the opening up fairy tale stock footage and the Wakaba attacking Utena stock footage.
Now, the opening fairy tale, notice how they repeated it again. Now, this will get repeated off and on throughout the entire show. Whenever it's repeated, don't just think, oh, it's a recap, oh, it's going to remind you.
Oh, we're killing time at the beginning of the episode by replaying
this thing. Because look what happened. They bring that up again. You see the fairy tale again. Remember what the prince says to little kid Utena.
たった一人で深い悲しみに耐える小さな君。その強さ、気高さをどうか大人になっても失わないで。今日の思い出にこれを。私たちまた会えるわよね。その指輪が君を僕のところへ導くだろう。
And then she's looking at her ring and she's saying to herself, this is the only proof she has that she even met that prince.
指輪だけは確かにまだここにあるんだ。あの出会いは本当のことなんだ。決闘広場、バラの花嫁、全部この指輪の導きなのかな。
Everything driving her up to this point has been around this ring, and she doesn't even remember what he looked like. The fact that she thinks that Toga looks remotely like that dude from her memory means she doesn't remember anything.
Yeah, we know, we remember more than she does because we see pictures of it, right? I guess she's not even remembering that much. And you can see when they do illustrate the prince, he doesn't even have a face. He just sort of has his white hair and this white uniform thing. So they repeated the fairy tale not only to kill time, but because it's relevant to this particular episode, especially if you missed the other episodes, right?
So you get the repeat of the ring is her proof, this is the only thing she's got, she met this prince, and then she meets Toga and actually talks to him, and if it's not obvious, he kind of knows what's going on. Notice how he gives very sort of knowing looks, and he's sort of planning ahead. He planned every interaction that he had except for Nanami attacking Anthe at the ball.
But it works out for him anyway, right? Here's the thing that's happening in this episode that most people don't realize is happening in this episode, right? It looks like, you've got Nanami, who is Toga's sister, and she wants to get back at Anthe. Why does she want to get back at Anthe? Because she's a bitch?
We'll get back to Nanami.
Right, and because, the girls at school are generally mad at Anthe for, I guess, ruining Saionji.
あんたのせいよ。あんたが垂らし込んだから、私たちの西園寺さんはダメになったんだ。
西園寺先輩、剣道部もずーっと休んじゃってんのよ。
Who is now crying and hidden away. It didn't even appear in the episode.
One thing you gotta learn about Saionji is that he's actually a gigantic baby wuss.
西園寺さんは昨日から部屋に閉じこもったまま、今日は学園に来てないそうです。
Yeah.
We're not going to see him again for a while.
So, but, Toga, at least on the surface level, if you just watch this without paying close attention, you think Utena's totally hot and he just wants to get with her because, she's mysterious and where did she come from? And who, he also wants to, I guess, get closer to her, maybe to use her or figure out her deal because she's the one person who's in on this dueling thing. She has a ring, but she doesn't get letters from the end of the world. He even tells the student council, no, she's different from us.
彼女もまた我々同様世界を革命しようとしているのか。
いや、彼女は我々と違い、世界の果てからの手紙を受け取ってはいないよう
だ。ならどうしてバラの刻印を持っている？
さて、どうしてかな。
They don't know her deal, so maybe he likes her, maybe he just wants to know her deal, maybe both.
No, so one example of this, he clearly knows that the ring ties her back to some memory from her past. He knows something about her because he very, very pointedly tries to pretend to be whoever that is, to be her prince.
俺と君はまんざら縁がないわけじゃないんだ。
あんたはなんでそれを持ってるんだ？
もちろん君と出会うために決まってるじゃないか。
まさか。
He is obviously setting himself up to be mistaken for whoever that person was in her past. Also kind of a creeper. I mean, he's a totally normal boy, so of course.
健全な男子生徒会長の桐生東賀です。
Yeah, he's way older. His sister's like hanging off of him, a little incesty, and he's hitting on this middle school girl.
All right, so
and he's the president of the student council. He's really important.
Let's talk about his sister. Nanami, now many of you who watch anime nowadays might not remember this old trope. There's kind of an old trope that the more complicated a character's hair is, the more evil they are.
Well, her eyes are also evil.
She has Rose of Versailles evil eyes and Rose of Versailles evil hair.
She's pretty much the most evil.
Now, we'll get to this more later, but there are occasional Nanami episodes. They're kind of infamous in the show.
We'll talk about when we get to them.
But suffice it to say, don't discount Nanami. The reason I say this now, and we'll get back to it when shit goes down, notice how when she came on the scene, she got the rose border and a yellow flower. She is different from everyone else, just like the student council and Utena are. There's something up with her, and it's going to come to light.
Right, but so far she's the only non-student council, non-Utena person.
Non-duelist.
Just sort of, right, but that's the thing, is like this episode was a duel, right, with Nanami, but it wasn't a formal duel with the swords and the roses, because Nanami isn't on the student council, or she doesn't have a ring, she doesn't get letters from the end of the world.
Was it with Nanami directly, though? If this were a duel...
Was it?
If this were a duel, what was Utena fighting for? She was, kind of flustered and talking to Toga and having that moment, and then she went in to save Anthe. She didn't even know.
Just like, again, the previous duel?
So, suddenly she's wearing the fancy dueling uniform, and when
she was wearing it under the dress? No.
Well, she might have been. That's how she is. That's how she rolls. But she's suddenly wearing this when it's time to save Anthe, to save her from a pretty... I mean, we know Anthe's a weird girl.
Save her fiancé.
She can't deal with basic situations very well. Crowds, people, anything.
She doesn't have friends except Choo-Choo. Which is repeated like 6 times this episode.
But remember, now think about what happened here. Utena wasn't even going to go to this thing. She only went because she wanted Anthe to go to make friends.
行かないのですか？
うん、興味ないからね。
では私も。
なんで？せっかくダンスクイーンにノミネートされているんだろう？
でも私、人が大勢いるような場所は苦手なんです。なんだかみんな同じような顔の人に見えて怖いんです。さあ、今度はチュチュの番よ。
いや、君は行った方がいい。ぜひ行くべきだよ。君には友達が必要だ。いや、そうだけど、もっとたくさん作るべきだ。
ウテナ様がそう言うのなら。
Toga wanted her there and sent the dress. Nanami wanted Anthe there and sent the dress. Everyone around this had crazy machinations that all culminated in this ball. And things didn't really go as planned because Utena saved Anthe, and I don't think Toga knew about Nanami's plan.
Right, so, yeah, of course not. So Anthe's plan was, of course, do whatever Utena says, right? Utena's plan was that, Anthe will make friends, and she thought she was making friends because she didn't know who Nanami was.
Well, Utena also had a kind of side plan of, it's against her sort of character to wear a dress and go to something like this, but... she's fascinated by Toga.
She had to figure out if Toga was the prince or not.
Toga's like a mini castle in the sky for her right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, the castle and all this stuff just links back to that ring. And
well, I mean, she spent a good few minutes looking out the window at him, right? And wondering what his deal was, right? So clearly, even though, outwardly she's not into him, she's like, screw you. She is kind of trying to figure out what's up with that guy.
Well, he's a totally normal boy.
健全な男子生徒会長の桐生東賀です。
Why does he have crazy red hair?
So, What was Toga after in this situation? We said in the previous episode of GeekNights Presents that Toga is inscrutable and you're not going to figure him out until he does what he's doing.
Right, so there were two things I already mentioned. Number one was maybe he just likes Utena and he wants to get close to her. Two, he wants to figure out her deal. Why is she dueling? Where'd she get the ring from? Right? But really, the thing you gotta notice is that Nanami, the whole episode, is just, she's way into Toga, even though they're siblings biologically.
Yep, you already get the impression that Nanami sets things in motion to hurt anyone who gets anywhere near or close to her big brother. She wants him all to herself.
Exactly. So, Toga knows this. He's not stupid, right? Nanami's hanging off of him.
And he's just told Nanami, hey, stop it with your stupid pranks.
Yeah.
Restrain yourself. And then Nanami's like, what do you mean?
Right.
By the way, who's that girl?
I mean, it might look sort of like, Nanami shenanigans are hidden from Toga.
Toga's not stupid.
She behaves when he's around. No. He knows what's going on. Why does he want Utena to dance with him so badly? Because Nanami will see that shit. And he knows that Nanami sees that shit. Nanami's going to hate on Utena hardcore and go after her.
So that failed because Nanami had her own plan that got in everyone's way. Utena saved her.
Well, Utena might have danced with Toga, except she had to go say and dance with Anthe because her dress dissolved.
But she made a spectacle anyway. Nanami found out who she is, and she will now be a target of Nanami's bullshit.
計画通りに運んでたのに、あの子何者？
ナナミ。おいたもほどほどにな。
さあ、何のこと？それより姫宮さんと踊ってる子、誰？
天井ウテナだ。
天井ウテナ？
ああ、生かすだろう。しかし、俺の送ったドレスを脱ぎ捨てるとはね。
お兄様があの女にドレスを？あの女に。
That is what Toga wanted in this situation.
So even though it didn't go off as he planned, with Nanami seeing him dancing with Utena, he still got what he wanted of Nanami wants to go after Utena.
So what you need to think about is, why did Toga sick Nanami on Utena, and what is he really after in this whole situation?
Well, I think clearly, Nanami is just, as she figured, Nanami didn't know who Utena was. She's like, who the hell is that?
Yep.
Right? But it's so weird that she would say that because Utena walks down, through the school, and every girl in school is like, oh my god, Utena, woo!
Well, if you look at it this way, Nanami, she got the rose border, so she is special in some sense that might be more relevant later in the show already. Mm-hmm. The thing is, all those things that happen to normal people aren't even on the radar for these people.
Yeah.
So, school drama, things that happen to normal people not associated with the student council, not duelists, none of that, they just don't even exist as far as these people are concerned. Yeah. They're just in the background.
The thing is, that it just makes it, Nanami is clearly a shallow school popularity kind of drama person, so the fact that Utena is so popular is more reason for Nanami to hate her and be jealous of her once she finds out who she is and what she's about.
かしらご存知かしら
So, the Shadow Girls are somewhat difficult for people to interpret, and sometimes they're not...
Well, they get more difficult as the show goes on. This is where they're still relatively normal. Like, when they're about to dance, they go, oh my god, this is gonna be a dancing ball, everyone's gonna go, it's good, right? They're mostly plainly describing the duel that is about to unfold.
Alright, so, there's one dog, two dogs, one dog, two dogs. Every time there's two dogs, it just shows basically a prince and a princess doing a stereotypical, ballroom ball dance like you'd see in a fantasy story. When there's one dog, the girls are basically talking about what the ball is actually, what it is, what it's like, what goes on there, and how it's kind of shameless and stupid.
舞踏会といえば聞こえはいいざますが、早い話がボーイハンとざます。最近のお嬢様には困ったものざます。
So, one level of reading into what the Shadow Girls are saying, beyond just, oh, there's going to be a ball, is that if there is a fantasy or an expectation as to what this sort of thing is, there is a counter-reality as to what it actually is. The Grand Galloping Gala was going to be the best thing in the world, but the reality of it, not nearly so great. Yeah. The fantasy of this ball is the prince and the princess, and the reality is it's just a bunch of socialites and losers.
Yeah. Well, it's, when there's one person alone at the ball, it's, when they're separate all themselves, the ball is a ball. It's the boring, the mundane, the literal, right? When the prince and the princess get together at the ball, then the magical things will happen, right?
So is it possible
two dogs
that, other than for the fact that Utena was there, and that Anthy was there, and that Anthy had this plot against her from Nanami, Utena would have been alone and basically been caught by Toga, or wouldn't have even gone. Anthy on her own would have been gotten by the plot, and no one would have saved her. The fact that Utena and Anthy were both there, and Utena was able to save Anthy, made that sort of the prince saving the princess thing that is the fantasy of the ball that never actually happens, happen.
Oh well. Yeah, I mean, this episode really doesn't have that much going on. It doesn't have like any side plots or tangents or anything like that. It's really straightforward. It's, you know, here's something going on, and the student council talks, and there's the dance, the end. You know, it doesn't have a whole lot else, you know, doing there. So we can go do another episode now.
Boop.